Hello, welcome everyone. I can see people are just joining the webinar, this morning's webinar. We'll wait and give everyone time to get into the room. We're expecting quite a few people today. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Okay, I think we're going to make a start. Welcome to the webinar for Propel for Deliver and Develop Grants for the Robust Safety Net. My name's Geraldine. I'm the Director of Collaboration at London Funders. London Funders is the membership, is not a funder, we're the membership organisation for funders in London, and we support them to work in collaborative ways. So London Funders is enabling and supporting the Propel collaboration. And I'm joined on the panel this morning by Nezahat from the London Legal Support Trust, by Shagufta and Sandra from City Bridge Trust, and by Rebecca from Trust for London. And we'll also be joined shortly by Nick Andrews from the GLA, who supports the Robust Safety Net mission. This is a webinar rather than a normal Zoom meeting. So you can see us, but we can't see you. And you can communicate with us through the, you're very welcome to say hello through the chat, but if you'd like to put questions to the panel, if you could use the Q&A box, which is should be down on your menu at the bottom. And then you can also, when someone asks a question, you can actually bump that question up by saying, yes, I'd like to ask that too. So you can move a question up to the top. So we will make sure that we take all the questions we can during this session. And if there's any that we don't answer, we will make sure that we answer them in the FAQs, which we'll be updating at the end of this week after all the webinars and workshops have been done. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to introduce Propel, give you an overview of the funding programme. Nick is going to give an update on the mission, the Robust Safety Net mission. Nezahat will talk a bit about the specific focus for the Deliver and Develop grants under the Robust Safety Net mission. And then we'll do a bit about the kind of practicalities, how to apply, what you can apply for, what the dates are, all of that kind of thing. And then we'll stop and take questions, all the way through. So, after each bit of the presentation. So hope this is useful for you and look forward to hearing what your questions are. And I'm just going to try and find my slides to start us off. Hang on one second. Right. This always takes me slightly longer than it would take somebody younger than me, but I do get there in the end. Okay, so this is about the Propel Deliver and Develop grants for the Robust Safety Net, and I've already said what we're going to cover today. So first we're introducing Propel. So Propel is about a new way of funding to support long-term change. It's about prioritising the communities who experience the biggest challenges and the civil society groups who are best placed to make change happen. And the whole programme starts with a small grant, which is called an Explore grant, for organisations who would like to who have an idea that they would like to start exploring. So there's a 1-year grant for them to do that. Today, we're talking about the Deliver and Develop grants. So that's for organisations who are already delivering and could scale that up and develop a wider partnership. And both of those grants will lead on to an opportunity to bid for a long-term funding partnership, recognising that actually if we want to change, if we want to tackle some of London's biggest issues, it's going to take time. It's going to take all of the assets of all of us. And just very briefly, this approach to collaboration builds on all sorts of things that have gone before, but with this particular group of funders, particularly the London Community Response, single application form, getting you in front of multiple funders, and the London Community Response really focusing on getting grants to equity-led organisations. And when the London Community Response made its last grant in March 2021, London funders went back to partners and said, wow, that was amazing. What if we did something like that, but we did it about long-term systemic change? So that's where this has come from. We've been working with a group of funders for a year now, together with our equity partners. So we have 5 equity partners who are Ubele, Inclusion London, LGBT+ Consortium, the Women's Resource Centre, and HERE, the Human Rights Network. And with those partners, we've developed a set of ambitions for Propel, which are about acting collectively, prioritising equity, being bold, achieving system-wide impact, and delivering long-term funding. So that's the journey that we're setting out on together, and together with you. There are a set of principles that underpin the way that we've gone about developing Propel. So we talk in all the materials about being systemic. So working across the whole system, thinking about, partners, not just within our sector, but within other sectors, understanding what the root causes are, and trying to change the underlying structures and behaviours that we see in the systems around us. One of the key principles is about being equitable. So we'll come back to this later, but equity-led organisations applying to Propel their applications will be assessed first to ensure that they have a fair crack at the funding. This is an experiment for funders and for grantees. So we will be doing lots and lots of learning along the way about how change happens and how we can support you best to make that happen. And it's about being long-term. So I'm just going to focus on those 4 for now, but there are obviously 8 principles. And I hope that these resonate with all of you. The Propel programme is using 3 of London's recovery missions as a springboard. The recovery missions, Nick will say a little bit more about this, I hope, when he joins us. The recovery missions have been a cross-sector effort since the middle of COVID, thinking about bringing people together from across different sectors, lots and lots of engagement with Londoners about what's important. There are 10 missions, and there are Propel is using 3 of them as a springboard. So today we're talking about the robust safety net, but there is also work going on around New Deal for young people and building strong communities. And the Develop and Deliver grants will enable organisations who are already delivering, so you need to be already delivering. If you're not already delivering, probably best to have a look at the Explore grants. But if you're already delivering, this is about you expanding that delivery. It's about scaling up partnerships or building new ones. It's about testing your assumptions and gathering evidence to understand the impact that your work's having, and then thinking about, okay, so how could that be embedded through a long-term grant? So I am hoping that Nick has joined us. I will stop sharing my screen. Yes, hello, Nick. Good to see you. Before you start, Nick, I'm just going to have a quick look at the Q&A. Yes, we will put the slides on the Propel website, so you can download them from there. So I am going to hand straight over to you now, Nick.
Thanks, Geraldine, and apologies, some slight technical issues joining this morning, but it's really great to be here to talk to you today about the Robust Safety Net mission. I'm just going to attempt to share my screen. There's just one slide that it would be helpful to have up in the background to talk to. So hopefully you can all see that now. Can we see that? Great. Hello to everybody. My name is Nick McAndrews. I'm Principal Policy Officer in the Financial Hardship team at the GLA, but I'm one of the officers working on the Robust Safety Net mission with colleagues from London councils, and also working closely with partners across the BCS sector and a wider range of partners indeed across London. So to date, it's been a really positive process and an opportunity to work closely with colleagues across London to tackle some of the issues that matter to us most. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview of the Robust Safety Net mission and then bring you up to speed with where we are, which will hopefully be useful context for today's session. So the Robust Safety Net mission was initially agreed by the London Recovery Board back, I can't remember how long ago it was now, feels like a lifetime ago, a couple of years ago, as one of the missions in response to the pandemic. The overarching goal of the mission, which is quite an ambitious one, but was to work collectively to ensure that by 2025, all Londoners could access the support they need to avoid or escape financial hardship. And at face value, that does sound quite ambitious, but I think when it was developed, what we recognised was that there are certain levers which can make a real impact to people's lives that just lie outside our collective gift to pull on. So for instance, the national benefit system is one of the prime examples. That lies in the hands of central government. There's not a huge amount we could do to influence that process, but what we did collectively realise was that actually there is a lot we can do at a local level to ensure that there is a better safety net for Londoners who need to use it. For instance, awareness and take up of a lot of the support that is out there is in many instances quite low. If we think about national benefits, for instance, conservative estimates suggest that there's at least £2 billion worth in unclaimed benefits in London alone every year. So although the challenges people face are significant, there is a lot of support out there that's currently going unclaimed. There is also a lack of consistency in the way in which kind of more localised support is provided to Londoners, whether that be through kind of council-run local welfare assistance, or whether that be through advice deserts, both geographically and amongst certain communities. Therefore, there is a lot we can do collectively to help improve awareness of the support that's out there, and particularly improve the access to what already exists, particularly for the most marginalised or disadvantaged communities who we know are missing out. So to work towards this goal, we've essentially been focusing on 3 core mission work strands, and hopefully you can see those on the slide there. I'm just going to touch briefly on all 3. The first is really around working with London councils and boroughs to try and develop a more consistent approach to local welfare offers from councils. This work primarily focuses on the more formal forms of social security, things like local welfare assistance schemes, discretionary housing payments, council tax support, that sort of thing. But it does also include broader approaches by some councils to embed a wider range of supports to their residents, and often this can include advice services, whether that be locally delivered by councils or commissioned to local providers. And it also looks looks at how boroughs can use administrative data to better identify households that might be in vulnerable situations, and more proactively promote the support that they do offer. The second and third streams are probably slightly more relevant to the work of Propel. We've got a work stream on embedding advice in community locations. This primarily revolves around a GLA-run project called the Advice in Community Settings Programme. This builds on some work we did previously with the Child Poverty Action Group, which embedded welfare rights advisors in primary schools. Doing this sort of work is, it's not new, doing this sort of outreach work. We all know it works well. But what's been really helpful is to use the recovery mission and that work with partners to really kind of accelerate that work and build on it, which has been pretty successful to date. At the moment, we're supporting 11 partnerships across London, and they involve advice providers, but community settings ranging from primary schools to food banks to children's centres to faith settings. There's a really wide range of community organisations involved in that work. And supporting them to create better partnerships between them and embed advice offers in community settings. One of the key aspects of that programme, and is something that we hope will have much wider application, potentially across some of the interventions that are funded through Propel, is an evaluation framework that attempts to really kind of draw consistent data from a wide range of different approaches that are all kind of getting at the same sort of thing. So we have developed an evaluation framework, which we're in the early stages of implementing at the moment. And what we do know from this programme is this approach of taking advice to the community spaces where people already go is really effective at reaching some of the most marginalised communities and helping them access the support they need. At the moment, the programme we know is disproportionately benefiting women, Black Londoners, and Londoners with English as a second or other language. So hopefully that programme kind of will be an inspiration to some of you when you're thinking about what you might want to bid for through Propel. The final work stream is also to do with advice, but it's been working with partners on the strategic coordination of advice across London, and that is really recognising that problem that there is consistency to how advice services are commissioned, and the way in which funders of all different types are supporting advice services across London. So really in parallel, I suppose, to Propel being developed and some of the work that Nezahat will talk to you later about on workforce interventions, we brought together a wide range of partners, many of whom are also involved in Propel, to really think about what the key strategic challenges facing the advice sector were, and think about some practical interventions or some particular areas to focus on, which we could bring collective action to. And I think as a result, we can see in the way that Propel has been designed and the way that Geraldine's described it to you so far that that work has fed into the design of this programme, and it's really positive to see so many people coming together to all be pulling in the same direction as a result of that. Before I hand back, just the other thing to say is that whilst this is a recovery from COVID programme, we can't ignore the fact that there is a cost of living crisis happening right now. So to a certain extent, some of the work we've been doing at the GLA and with partners has pivoted slightly to think about what support we can bring in the immediate term. It's great to have those kind of longer term ambitions, but we recognise we do need to be doing what we can now as well. So just a few things that we've done more recently, which bring that shorter term support, but in a way that we hope is more consistent with these kind of longer term goals of the robust safety net. So for instance, there's a cost of living hub which has been launched on the GLA website, which has been fed into by a range of recovery partners, and they're also helping to promote it. And that essentially kind of seeks to really raise awareness of the rights and entitlements we're talking about, and bring everything together into a single place. We're also accelerating some of our work with councils to use data-driven approaches to promote some of the forms of support that are out there at the moment. So for instance, there is the Household Support Fund, which is that sort of more immediate term support from government, which we're supporting councils to distribute to their residents, and also looking at particularly underclaimed benefits like pension credit and what we can do there to really ensure as many older Londoners as possible are claiming that if they're eligible. And lastly, and probably most significantly in relation to this programme, there's been the opportunity to forge new strategic partnerships with with some pan-London networks of advice services. So we're really proud to be supporting the London Citizens Advice Network and the London Legal Support Trust network of centres of excellence, and helping them sustain and increase their advisor capacity where possible in light of the current situation, but also develop new partnerships with community organisations to really ensure that those who need it most are getting access to the advice offer that is out there. And then the final aspect of that is really just this eye, which is very consistent, I think, with the aims of the Propel programme, is thinking about how we can support that sort of longer term workforce. So there's a real element to the partnership we've got, which is around supporting apprentices and upskilling advisors to fill gaps in more specialist provision. So we're really excited about that programme, and we really look forward to seeing how that can kind of roll into this longer term approach that we're all trying to take through the safety net mission and through Propel. So I shall hand back to Geraldine now.
Thank you, Nick. That's great. Really helpful overview. There's a question that I think is probably for you, actually, from Matt Brown. What kind of buy-in do you have from the London boroughs? And might those boroughs that have traditionally invested in their advice services feel penalised if resources plug the gaps left by those boroughs that have not invested?
That's a good question. I think probably just worth saying, you know, one of the huge advantages and the things that's been so beneficial about the recovery process has been the ability to work much more closely with boroughs and with London councils, not just on you know, the sort of council-run local welfare assistance, but also bringing them into this wider conversation about advice commissioning, about advice funding, to understand how we can kind of, you know, bring a much more collective effort to filling some of those gaps. I think what we've encountered is you know, it's impossible to work with every single borough, but what we are trying to do is to work with as many as possible, and really use those ones who are already doing some fantastic work to promote that best practice, but also kind of, you know, support them to build on the approaches that they're already taking. So, you know, some of the advice funding partnerships that we're supporting through the programme, you know, they are located and involving councils that are already doing a lot of work. So we're not diverting everything to places where there are gaps. I think it's a sort of it is a staged approach, but I think those councils play a really important role in demonstrating what works well, and bringing other councils along with them. So we're really, you know, keen to work with those sorts of councils as much as possible, because ultimately that's the only way we'll get to as close to pan-London coverage with all these sorts of things as we possibly can.
That's great. And a question from the Council of Somali Organisations about, can they know which boroughs you're working with? Is that information available somewhere on the website? Yeah,
there are some links to who we're working with in the advice and community settings programme, and which we can send around with 11 partnerships. 9 of them are borough or kind of sub-borough based. The other 2 have a slightly larger reach, and I think we'll be in a position to publish a bit more information about the sort of funding through being given to London Legal Support Trust and London Citizens Advice to kind of demonstrate where that funding is being distributed. But I think across we have a presence, I think, in almost every borough, I think, with the funding that we're providing across the entire scope of the mission. But yes, we can certainly post some links. If not in the chat now, we can send some round post meeting.
Yeah, any of the links you can put in the chat would be really welcome, I think. Another question, I think, for you, Nick, or any of the partners: what work are you doing specifically to support young people who've been excluded from school? Is that the New Deal?
That may be
Young People mission.
That may be a little bit more to do with the New Deal for Young People mission, but probably just worth, you know, saying, you know, a lot of this, the advice and community settings work, that came from work we initially did in schools. It was primarily primary schools, but many of the partnerships we're supporting through advice and community settings are working in schools and SEN schools, and I think there's some links to pupil referral units as well. So there is some support in there, and it's very much based on what communities are telling us the need is. You know, so it's not us kind of dictating top down what they should be focusing on. It's about them demonstrating the need and us supporting them to take innovative action to meet that need.
Great, thank you. And one final question, I think this might be for anyone on the panel actually. Where do people get advice on their basic rights? For example, to decent accommodation, prosecution for civil matters? Nezahat.
Well, there are several ways of getting that advice. There's a really good website called Advise Local. I would really encourage people to visit that website. And Advise Local will allow you to put your postcode in, and it will give you and also ask you what the area of advice you need. It will give you a list of organizations, including law centers, citizens advice, and other specialist legal advice agencies and organizations that provide that particular advice. It will give you a list of those. I think that's probably one of the best places to go to. But other than that, there are local citizens advice, local law centers in terms of legal advice, and other community organizations that one can refer. But Advise Local website is pretty good.
That's great, thanks, Nezahat. There's one more question actually from the Council of Somali Organisations. Have you the funders and mission team identified gaps in advice requirements as they currently have money in debt and hope to restart benefits and housing?
I mean, I can just come in on that, I suppose. A lot of the work we've been doing, in fact, most of the work we've been doing through the mission on the advice side has been informed by evidence of where we know those gaps are, or that we think those gaps are. And I think there's been several really helpful publications which have helped inform that. There was something the GLA commissioned the Advice Services Alliance to do Advising Londoners report, which was I think came out just at the outset of the pandemic, but subsequently I know there've been other forms of research that have looked particularly at groups that are missing out on certain types of advice, which I think has informed a lot of the work that Nezahat's been leading, and other people active in the sector as well. So yes, most of it is informed by where we know there are gaps, and we are looking to fill those gaps in the work that we're doing.
That's great. Okay. That is really helpful. And Nezahat, the Advice Local link, that will tell you where your nearest face-to-face centre is, won't it?
Yes, once you put the postcode in, then it will give you a list of organizations where you are.
Lovely. That's great. Oh, we've got, we're sorry, there's some more questions coming through. We're just going to take a couple more and then we will need to move on. There's a question here about from Action on Disability, which is about young disabled people and employment. I think, David, you might want to, there's a webinar this afternoon on the New Deal for Young People mission. It looks to me like that might be, there might be some more focused information available for your project there. And I'm sorry, we can't in this webinar answer questions about the specific projects that you might be applying for. But Jess is going to let you have the link for this afternoon's webinar. Okay. Thank you, Council of Somali Organisations, for putting that report in the questions. If you could drop that in the chat as well, that would be really helpful. There are some questions here about what the funding will support, and we'll come on to those later. One from Eleanor, though, funding in the short term to address expansion of the need for benefits advice as a result of the cost of living crisis. Can I come back to you, Nick, on that?
Is this whether that will be this whether the program will be able to cover that, or whether there's other funding available?
Yeah, I think so. So I would say this Propel is not a crisis funding program. And the reason, I mean, it's recognizing that absolutely there is crisis after crisis, and that the cost of living crisis is an overwhelming one for communities and for the organisations that they're supporting, that support them. Propel is an attempt to deal with some of the underlying issues that mean that we're in crisis after crisis after crisis. So Propel won't be doing short-term crisis funding. I know that through London funders and partners and members, there are conversations about where crisis funding might be made available for cost of living. I'm not sure if it's been announced yet, so but it will, when it's available, we'll definitely make it as we'll definitely, you know, do lots of communication around it.
I think just to add from our point of view, one of the issues I think we've discovered, even with kind of short-term funding to increase capacity, lots of organisations we're supporting are coming across this issue of actually not being able to recruit anybody, because, you know, it goes back to this issue of kind of workforce, and actually, you know, without that sort of longer term sustainable funding, it's very difficult to bring new people into the sector. But of course, you know, we can certainly send around more information about where sort of open grants are and things like that at the GLA, to see if there might be anything that fits.
Great, that's great. Okay. I think we're going to move on now. Thanks for keeping on posting questions. So we're going to talk now about the specific focus under the robust safety net. So Propel grants under the robust safety net won't cover all of the things Nick talked about. There will be a specific focus for them. I'm going to go back to the presentation. I've just got right. Here is one slide on the focus, and I'm going to ask Nezahat to talk to this. You're on mute, Nezahat.
Yes, thank you, Geraldine. It's great to be here to talk about this opportunity. So what I thought I should begin with, so Geraldine already mentioned, and Nick also mentioned in his presentation as well. So this program is about some of the London's biggest issues. So the issues that the reason why we came together in the first place as a group of funders is this is to respond to issues that are bigger than us. Not one funder can resolve or respond on their own with the sector. So that was one of the reasons why we came together. About Geraldine said a year for Propel work, but ours is a little bit longer than a year. So as some of you might know, London Funders has an advice network that brings together funders of advice in London. So about in 2019, we had a presentation from Advice Services Alliance at that network about their advising Londoners research. So the research at that time identified a number of issues, quite kind of rightly within the advice sector, because there are a lot of issues that affect the advice sector. But one of the issues that came across quite strong was the workforce crisis in the advice sector. We also, individual funders like us, Trust for London, the City Bridge, the lottery, also get feedback from our grantee partners that this is a big issue. And we help some legal advice agencies with kind of with advertising their roles and stuff. And we know that they advertised one position more than once, twice, and sometimes 3 times. We also knew that in the past, some legal aid contract holders had to give their legal aid contract back because they couldn't find housing supervisors. The same issue exists for lack of immigration supervisors, lack of employment advisors. So there is a crisis in the sector about recruitment, also retention and progression, but we'll come to that later. So that was the reason why we came together as a steering group. The steering group funder partners, mainly some of partners are here at the Trust for London, the City Bridge, GLA, and also the Lottery, Paul Hamlin, Legal Education Foundation. So we discussed some of these issues as the funders first, and then we invited some advice sector representatives to join our steering group. So Advise UK, Law Centres Network, Refugee Action, Toynbee Hall, University House Legal Advice Centre are also part of the steering group and have been part of discussions around the workforce. We knew that there was crisis in the sector, but we didn't know what we could do because the issue is so big that we didn't know what to do to respond to these issues. Some of the issues we cannot resolve ourselves. They're bigger than us, like policies, procedures that are having big impact on advice sector, on pay, salaries, like cost of living crisis at the moment. So some of those issues are bigger than us, and I don't think, on our own we can respond to those. But to understand what we can do with the sector partners, we commissioned a piece of research and together with Trust for London, Paul Hamlin and us, and with other partners' contribution, the City Bridge, Paul Leff, and the Lottery as well. So we commissioned a piece of research, and that research was published in May 2022. So the research, we didn't want to kind of look at the level of crisis, but what we were looking for is a sort of action plan for funders and the sector to come together to look at. So I'm going to talk about that research very, very briefly. I'm going to try to share, Geraldine, if you can stop sharing your, yeah, thank you. I'm going to try to share my screen now, just to talk to you very briefly about research, because your questions are more important than what I need to say, I think. So I'll be very brief. So in terms of kind of the research, this is who had done the research, these consultants, and Mark himself is from the sector, advice sector. So in terms of what the research was focusing on, it focused on solution-focused work, building on findings of previous reports, for example, advising Londoners. So it built on the previous reports. And it had interviews with selected stakeholders in funding, coordination, and service provision parts of the sector. Also had interviews with apprentices and wider frontline workforce, including a group of young people, and had planning and steering group support throughout. So the steering group that I mentioned earlier on oversaw this work with consultants. So in terms of contextual overview, the research recognized that there is a fragmented systems alongside higher and increasing demand in the advice sector. It requires a pathway, career progression approach, more than training, workforce development. So training is part of it, but without career and clear pathways, we will still continue using those people. So employment conditions underpin all of these workforce issues, salary levels and structures, benefits that advice sector probably is not very good in doing. So career sustainability opportunities. So these are the factors that also have impact on workforce. And some of these, as I said, are beyond our control, but some of it, hopefully together working in partnership, we can start looking for some solutions. Appropriate funding practice can contribute to promoting effective management and career progression. We know, we are really aware of that. The main London funders are here today as part of this panel. You keep telling us, and some of us are from advice sector ourselves. We applied to those funding in the past. So we know that short-term funding is not doing any good to workforce development and or retention and progression. So this is something that we are also talking to see kind of if longer term, and this is one of the aims of Propel as well, the longer term sustainable funding is there for workforce development issue to be resolved partially. So other stakeholder consultation overview of key points, as I mentioned, fragmented system with increasing demand, disjointed career progression, lack of change and diversity in leadership, fractured funding base, we mentioned that, and addressing skills gap relies on organization sustainability, which we mentioned already. So in terms of ensuring equity and balance in the system, the research identified that there is a power imbalance within the advice sector. So diversity of organizations meeting people's needs at different points of their journeys, and reported power imbalances in system, as I mentioned, and overall allocation of funding across different parts of sector. In terms of practical solution opportunities that will be based off our funding, and I think that in the guidance there is a link to the research, and applicants are really strongly encouraged to go and look at that research. But in terms of practical solutions that we'll be focusing on, there are some case studies, a good examples given in the research. These are just some of them. That doesn't mean that this will be the only kind of solutions that we'll be focusing on. But some of them include apprenticeship schemes, specifically after the changes to solicitors qualifying exam and accreditation schemes. Apprenticeship was given as an example, a potential kind of to train people in the sector. MVQs that we used to have, community-based MVQs that were quite effective at that time, but it's since gone, it's all gone. So whether we should bring those back as part of community advice training. Organizations mentioned grow our own. So they said we have capacity, we just need funding to grow our own, and we can train people on the job once we're given opportunity. Accessibility inclusion essential, and this may need funding to ensure ring fence. So we talked about the equity and accessibility of these programs to different sections of community so that people can get advice at from different points of community organizations. Need to actively seek and listen to diverse views and knowledge. So again, applicants will be really encouraged to read on that in the report, and increase connections with other sectors to improve career pathways and opportunities through development of transferable skills. So I'm going to stop sharing, but I'm going to say a few other things in terms of the research that we've done, but also what we're looking for. So we're looking for, like we are as a kind of partnership of funders, we've come together because we know that this issue is too big for one funder to respond. This is what we'll be looking for in the applicants as well. So we know that this is a big issue for the sector, each kind of members of sector to address themselves. So we'll be looking for a partnership approach with this funding. When we say advice, we're looking for advice as a whole, because we really believe that in order to resolve some of the issues to do with workforce development, each part of advice has a key role to play. And we really need to see how together funders and the advice as a whole start looking for some of the solutions to workforce issues. This will be a very proactive approach. I mentioned the steering group. So the steering group will be a bigger steering group, and under that there will be other advisory boards set up, advisory groups set up for different issues. And we're not looking at just grant maker and grantee relationship here. We're looking for a proactive relationship with potential applicants, in the sense that, you know, to shape the future of the work together, and to shape the future of work based on the learning that's coming through and shared with the steering group members. So this will be a really proactive way of working with funders and sector representatives. Geraldine mentioned learning partner. So learning will be one of the key issues of this process. And we're looking for potential to scale up. So something that might start very small, but has really potential to scale up in the future, because we're hoping that more funders will come on board, and more investment could be done in this field. Alongside this grants program, the steering group will also look at other issues that are identified in the skills research. So that's, for example, salary structure within the advice sector. As an employer, what makes us a better employer? The other benefits that advice sector can offer, and also the quality of advice. So there will be other side issues that the steering group will also continue working on alongside this grant. And finally, I would say that there is an opportunity here for us, and there is a partnership of funders, and most of us understand the level of the issue. And I just really want to focus on the partnership approach, that together with funders and the sector representatives take this opportunity to start making some changes within the advice sector with regards to workforce development. I think that's all I would say at this point, and hopefully we'll take some questions. Thank you, Geraldine.
That's great. Thanks, Nezahat, for that really comprehensive overview of the focus for the Deliver and Develop grants under the Robust Safety Net. There's a few comments rather than questions actually in the box, all from Liz at Inclusion London. One about making sure that smaller community groups who train advisors do not then lose them to the big agencies once they're trained. One is about will funders give any advice on salary scales to ensure community advice is sustainable? And the third one is about MVQs, advice and guidance. MVQs from Advice UK, are they still being provided?
Okay, well, in terms of salary structure, that's something that we'll, as I mentioned, as steering group, we'll be looking at. But it's not something that we'll impose. Hopefully that's something that together with the sector representatives, we'll look at to see what's available now. How can we make some sort of standardization? And something that we keep getting told is advisors who do the same job in different organizations get paid differently. Probably it's to do with the kind of size of organizations. But if they do the same job in different organizations, why would they get different kind of salaries? So that's something that we are aware of, and we will be looking at as part of the salary structure. And hopefully together, as I said, we will be coming up with some sort of standardization in salaries that the funders will bear in mind when they start funding advice work. So that's one thing. The second thing was I think that the issue, the fear of advisors being lost to bigger organizations. I think, Liz, I mentioned that in order to resolve this issue, every player within the advice sector has a key role to play. So the research clearly talks about the strengths of community-based organizations, smaller community-based organizations, to bring in new blood, new advisors into the sector. And research also talks about specialist organizations, particularly specialist legal advice agencies, that have strengths in playing a training role and sharing kind of their capacity with smaller organizations as well. So we're kind of trying to say that each one has their own strengths, and can we bring those together to start finding solutions? And if the community-based organization wants to develop their capacity to provide specialist organization, I think they should be able to do that. But if they want to play the role of kind of entry-level advice and leave the specialism to other specialist advice, because each organization has their own specialism. Each organization is specialist organization in their own way. But in terms of the levels of advice I'm talking about, if they want to leave the casework to other organizations, that's fine to do so as well, provided that we increase the capacity to take on more referrals in specialist advice. So that's how we're looking at. The third one, there was something else.
It was about MVQs.
Yeah, and I don't know, after MVQ's question, Sandra Gupta or Rebecca, you want to come in for this community-based and specialist organizations issue, because that's an issue that we keep getting asked, actually. In terms of MVQ, Advise UK is part of the steering group, and we will be looking at the MVQs. I think the research does identify some of the provision, but it's not as wide as it used to be, MVQ level exam advice. But they were really effective, and if there is an appetite in the sector, we will be keen to look at MVQ level advice again.
I think, and I mean, there's another question asking about AQS. And that is something I know that Trust for London do support small organisations in helping them get that. And we have recently included that in our advice strand within City Bridge. So, I mean, that support is there outside this funding.
Okay. That's great. Sandra, does that respond to, sorry, Rebecca, carry on. No.
I guess just to kind of build on what Nezahat's said, you know, in terms of the purpose of these partnerships that we want to support is around sharing skills and experiences between the kind of specialist advice providers in terms of kind of legal advice providers, but then also the smaller community organisations that are kind of rooted in the community, that understand the needs of the local community. And I think there's a question further up where somebody's asked about putting an application into this fund as well as individual applications to City Bridge and Trust for London. In terms of the grants that we fund through our main programmes, it's mainly that direct service provision, the advice provision. So I'd encourage people, you know, whoever that person is, to speak directly to us. In terms of the kind of broader programme, you know, this is around kind of workforce development. So it isn't around funding the direct service provision. My dog's now making a noise in the background, so he's also featuring on this webinar, I think. But really what we want to do is try to support you through Propel to kind of build the workforce, to kind of have that specialist workforce in place and to kind of nurture and support you going forward. But I think some of it, you know, you will need to speak to us directly, either through London Funders or London Legal Support Trust, to kind of clarify and kind of build the application and the proposals that you want to develop. And within the research, there are some really good examples of other programs that are going on. So I think having a look at the research, not just the recommendations, but the case studies as well, would be really useful.
That's great, thank you. Can I just, one other question here. Are domestic abuse advocates seen as advisors?
Definitely. Definitely, they are advisors, and they are trained and qualified. If it's IDVA, so there is independent domestic violence advocates, or ISVA, independent sexual advice advocates, they are qualified advisors. So yeah, and in terms of kind of the sections, as I said, we're looking at the advice section as a whole, and violence against women and girls is part of that bigger advice sector.
That's great. That's really helpful. Okay, so I think most of the questions now are about the kind of practicalities. So I'm going to go on to some slides about that. Let's go down to, yeah. Okay, so hopefully this will answer most of the questions that you've put in the box, but we'll come back afterwards. Who's eligible to apply? So you need to be a charity, a CIO, a CIC, or a charitable community benefit society, otherwise known as a BENCOM. So if you are not one of those, then you can be part of, you can apply as part of a collaboration or a partnership, but the lead organisation needs to be one of these types of organisation. And the other eligibility criteria, when you go on the website, there's a little eligibility check. The other question is about whether your work is of benefit to Londoners. And there's been a couple of questions in the chat about what is, can national organisations apply? Can organisations based outside of London apply? You can, but you will need to make it really clear about how your work benefits Londoners. And there may need, when you have a grant agreement, that may restrict, depending on which, many of the funders here are restricted to funding London work. So, so you can, but you'll need to make the case why. So you need to be one of those organisations, but what we're looking for is organisations who are already delivering and ready to expand. I talked earlier about prioritising applications led by and for marginalised communities, and in particular we're looking for applications from communities experiencing racial inequity, deaf and disabled people, LGBT people, and work with women and girls. And when we say, there's two things to define in here. One is about what does prioritise mean? It means those applications will get assessed first. And secondly, what does led by mean? Led by, we're using a definition that we've developed and agreed with our equity partners, which is that 75% of your trustees and 50% of your staff need to be from the communities that you're serving. So those organisations, applications from those organisations will be prioritised, but that doesn't mean you need to be one of those organisations to apply. We encourage applications from organisations who are already delivering, who are already thinking about this kind of systemic change, about how do we change the structure and the way that the system works in order to make the sector stronger for the future. So this is, people who are already thinking about workforce issues, people who are already thinking about sustainability issues. And we encourage applications from organisations who are already working in collaboration. So you might be working with other charities, you might be working with bits of the public sector, but you don't have to be already in a partnership. You can build your partnership during the lifetime of the grant. Anything you wanted to say on that slide, Nezahat? Anything more you wanted to?
Not really. I think if there are any questions, we'll take the questions. what I would say in terms of, I think you already mentioned that equity partners their applications will be read first, but this doesn't mean that there won't be other applications. I think what you said in the beginning, civil society organizations that are best placed to make that change. But whatever kind of ways, we are looking for that partnership work that I mentioned, and equity will be at the heart of that partnership. So that's what I wanted to add.
Yeah, yeah. And when you go onto the application form, there will be questions about what kind, in terms of the communities that you serve, who is it you working, who is it you target your services at, how is your leadership made up, but also how do you, regardless of how you're structured, how do you make sure that equity and justice are at the heart of your work? So there's opportunities for you to demonstrate that. So to make an application, you go to the website, londonpropel.org.uk, and you set up an account. And that means you can come backwards and forwards and, start your application and stop it. And, you'll be really familiar with these kind of online funding portals. You have to answer those 2 eligibility questions. So that will make sure that if you're not eligible, you're not going to be wasting your time. And then there are 2 bits to it. One is about your organisation and one is about your application and your budget. Just to be really clear, you can only make 1 application. You can be a partner in more than 1 application on a Deliver and Develop grant, but you can only be the lead organisation on 1 application. And that 1 application means also that includes the Explore grants as well. So, if you're also looking at Explore, you're going to need to decide which one is the best fit for you. So the information that we'll ask about your organisation, so some contact details, obviously, so that funders can get in touch with you, what you do, how long you've been doing it, how many people you reach, how many people you employ, that kind of thing. The questions about the communities that you serve, which I've just mentioned. A very simple financial overview of your organisation, which will cover the last year you've got accounts for, the current year, what you think your outturn is going to be, and the previous year. If you haven't got the previous year, that's fine. You can just put a 0 in those columns, but you will need to have at least 1 year of signed accounts in order to apply. And then we'll ask you to upload these 3 key documents. And the thing about the organisational details, we're hoping that, if you then come back to apply for other grants with Propel in the future, you won't have to keep putting in this information. So we're hoping that this is a way of reducing some of that duplication that you have to do all the time when you're applying for grants. When you start your application for a Deliver and Develop grant, these are the questions you're going to have to answer. So it's, why, what, how, who, where. So you will need to show how this builds on work that you're already doing. You will need to show how who you're targeting and how you are going to involve them in designing the work. Who will you work with to deliver? That's a question about your partners. If you are working in a partnership, put all the information about who the partners are and what roles they're going to play in there, and funders will probably come back to you for some more information on your partners. You will be asked about who's going to actually deliver the work. This is about your staff. Or staff and your partners, and really, really keen, recognising the pressure that everybody is under in civil society. How will you support those people? So, make sure you put in costs into your budget for proper supervision and support. And ditto with the partnerships. This was a question as well. You will need to put in the costs of running a partnership well and effectively. And then there's some questions about outputs and outcomes and impact, and the learning. How will you understand what's working well, and what you need to develop further, and then some thinking about how you might develop it further in the future. So these grants are that we're designing them to be as flexible as possible, but I think they're likely to be restricted grants. But I think funders will take a fairly, you tell funders what it is you need to run this program. So these are examples of the kinds of things that the grants might cover. But if there are other things that we haven't thought about, then put them in your budget and make the case for why they're needed. So absolutely, the costs of delivering, the costs of supporting your staff and volunteers, the costs of running your partnership, the costs of engaging with the people that you're benefiting, and costs about learning and evidencing the work that you're doing, and core costs. Anything any of the funders want to say on that slide? That all seem fair? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. There are a few questions, but maybe we'll take it at the end of your presentation.
Okay,
Geraldine.
2 more slides and then we'll go back to questions. The deadline is the 9th of December. So that is 2 months away, just under 2 months away. If you need any, if a standard online application process isn't available to you, is not accessible to you, get in touch with us and we will provide it in other formats. For those who need it in other formats, we can also discuss with you other ways of applying, of making an application, and support you through that process. And I mentioned earlier our equity partners who are working with those communities that are being prioritised. If you are from one of those communities and you want to talk your application through or get some support on your ideas, you can get in touch with one of our equity partners. All of their details are on the Propel website, or you can get in touch with London funders and we'll get you onto them. And just very briefly, what happens next? The funders will do their shortlisting before the end of the year, and then in January the assessment will begin. During January, we will also have an overview panel which will look across all of the grants that are being assessed under all of the missions, just to make sure that there is a good spread across different places, different issues and different communities. Funders are likely to get in touch with you for a direct conversation about your application. We're hoping that all of the funders will make decisions in February, and then March or April, the delivery can begin. So I will stop sharing my screen and let's have a look at the questions. So we've answered some questions. I hope we've answered the questions about whether partnerships don't need to already be established. But you've heard Nezahat say that the really looking for partnership working here. Is that right, Nezahat?
Yes, it is. And also I'm sure Sandra Shukufta and Rebecca will share that as well. We are aware that this is a short deadline. So if we are looking for partnership, and we're aware that there's only 2 months kind of to develop those, and that's why we said kind of existing work that you want to scale up, and if the work has already started. But if kind of you have a really good idea and you don't have time to form those partnerships, and it doesn't have to be a complete application form as such. So as I think I did mention that this is a very proactive approach. So if we think that, you know, this is a part of solution, then we'll work with you to actually develop that partnership in the future. And I wanted to say that because 2 months is not kind of enough to have a meaningful kind of partnership in place. So please don't be put off by that. Just let us know if kind of that's the case.
Okay.
I think that there was one from Linda Parkin. The range of DD grants is very wide. Is there any overall amount of funding available for this initiative across all 3 recovery missions? So I can only answer for robust safety net. We haven't put an upper limit as such. I think I did say again in my presentation that you could kind of think big, but you know, we can start small now. And as kind of we bring more funding into this theme, hopefully we'll then scale up in the future. And that's the reason why we haven't put any upper limit to this work. But I'm not sure about the other missions, Geraldine.
We're thinking that in the region of 40 deliver and develop grants are likely to be made, and in the region of 20 explore grants. We have a group of funders who are already in and committed to the programme, and we are confident that other funders will join as applications start to come in. So we can't give you a kind of there's this much in the pot, because we're hoping that it will grow during the period between now and the 9th of December. But it's $1 million question. There is a question about the question from Rachel at Voluntary Action. Harry, if the applications from equity-led organisations are assessed first, if there are a lot of good applications, is there a chance that non-equality organisations could be rejected if all the money has been allocated? I think that is yes, that's what that is the implication of those applications being prioritised. I think that under this particular robust safety net one, I think we're fairly confident that not all of the money, that there will be applications from non-equity led organisations which are likely to get funded.
Yes, I would echo that. I mean, this is a very specific issue, and we are looking for training and development within the sector. And there are umbrella organizations that have been providing this. There are other advice agencies that have been providing training and development. We do envisage that there will be some applications that are not equity-led, but even within that partnerships, that the equity focus needs to be there. The work with community-based smaller organizations need to be there. I think just to answer one of Liz Mercer's question about whether the organizations have to have AQS in order to apply. Liz, no, that's not a requirement, because some of the organizations that provide training and development are not service delivery organizations. And because of that, they won't have AQS. But what they need to have is the track record of delivering kind of training and development, and also working with community organizations. I think that will be the bigger requirement rather than AQS.
Great, thanks. Question from Anne Faulkner. Can you apply with a specialism, or would you need to build a partnership representing multiple specialisms across the whole advice sector?
I'm looking at other steering group members. I don't think we've defined this as such. I think we are told, as I said again in my presentation, that there is more crisis in one sector than the others probably. So like crisis of housing supervisors, crisis of housing advisors, specialist welfare advisors, immigration advisors, employment advisors. So that there are some kind of areas that have been identified in the research as well. But if it's a partnership of multiple areas, I think that still will be welcome as well. We're quite open and flexible at the moment. As I said, we don't want to define the parameters so tightly that we're actually imposing the solutions. We don't want to impose solutions. We want solutions to come to us. We've done our bit to come into partnership to start looking at those solutions, but hopefully the sector will work in partnership to tell us what the solutions are. And that's why we need to be a bit flexible in this robust safety net.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. A couple of questions here, just clarifying. These are not grants for direct service delivery. These are about workforce support. Yep, that's great. So there are some questions about the, and a question about requiring funding to ensure continuity. Well, if your continuity was about workforce development, then that presumably would fit. Perfect. Questions on there's not a limit on the size of organisation. And there is not, as far as I know, because there are different funders involved in this, because there are a range of different funders, it would be difficult for us to say this is the policy on reserves, this is the policy on core cost contributions, because each funder will look at it slightly differently. So I can't give you an answer to those. It is a one-stage application. Workforce support, does it mean increasing the staffing levels or something else?
It's both, increasing staffing levels and also progressing by providing clear pathways, progressing the existing staffing as well, training and progressing existing staff as well. So it's both, it's not only one.
Helpful. Thank you. Just take a couple more. There's a question about a wider list of funders for advice services. I would suggest that you go on to 360 Giving and type in advice and see who's been funding that in London. That's probably the best way to do it. Places that offer training for IAG. Where's a good place to get that?
Again, if others can jump in if they know any, but this is something that our research identified that there isn't a clear kind of way of finding who provides the training in the advice sector at the moment. So this is, I talked about the side issues that the steering group will be working on. So this is something else that hopefully we'll be working on together to identify where the training is provided, what the requirements are, and how the training is provided, and hopefully bring it together or make clear pathways for people to find it. But as it is, I don't think there is one particular place that you can find all the training providers of IAG at the moment. Unless I'm wrong, Sandra and Rebecca or Shagufta. Yeah, I think you're all nodding, yeah.
Okay. Evidence of partnerships. If you already have a partnership together, yes, it would be useful for funders to see your MOUs. So I would, you won't need to attach them to the application, the initial application, but you will need to have them ready when funders get in touch with you.
I think there's a question from Selina. Oh, have we answered that already about whether the funding is for service delivery? I think we probably have answered that already.
Yes,
So
I
you
think
said, Geraldine, yeah.
There's a question from Liz here, which is about clarifying that. I'm a little confused as bringing in new advisors and training them will lead to increased delivery.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Liz. You're absolutely right. But what we meant by that, probably we need to clarify that. So this funding is not to apply saying that we want to deliver advice to 500 people in this place. So it's not about this. It's not about service delivery as such, because the individual funders already continue providing funding for the areas that they support already. This is about the workforce, specific workforce development. But if you say that, just an example, that we want to work with this organization to take on 2 apprentices, and we know that those apprentices will be trained and will be fully qualified within 2.5 years or 6 years, depending on whether they have a qualification already or not. But during those 2 years or 6 years, they will be providing advice. So in that sense, you will increase the advice services, but the focus is training those people. And while they're being trained, they will also provide advice. Same for growing your own. So growing your own, you take an advisor, you're training that advisor on work, on job. But while you're training that advisor will provide advice to clients. So in that sense, you're absolutely right. We are also trying to increase the advice provision, but the main focus is through training. I hope it's clear. If not, Rebecca, jump in, because I know we had a conversation earlier on about this.
I think that's really clarifying, and I also think we need to think about how we put that in the guidance, or make sure that when people are applying that that's kind of understood. But yeah, that's my understanding as well.
That would be great. Okay, and we will update the FAQs with the questions that you've been asking today. So I'm just keeping one eye on the time. Yes, if you are successful in securing a grant, it will be with one of the contributing funders. We haven't planned to do anything to help smaller organisations find bidding partners, but if that's something that organisations would like us to do, we can certainly think about setting up some kind of matchmaking event. We'd be really happy to do that. So do email us if there's an app, and we'll see how much appetite there is for that. And then Liz, noting your question about list of requirements for the lead partner, we will make sure we put some more guidance on that into the FAQs. So I am going to
sorry, Geraldine, there's a question from James. I think it might be important to answer that as well.
Oh, yes.
I think that might be a widespread worry.
Okay.
I think, James, if I understood what you're saying, that there might be an organization might be receiving funding from collaborative partners already, or maybe they've already applied to individual partners who are on the panel right now. And whether that will work against them, or whether this during the skills work that will be taken into account or not. If your applications, existing work or existing applications to funders are about service delivery, not about kind of training, definitely not, because we're saying that, you know, we're not going to fund service delivery as such, you know, the way we explained. So we're going to focus on workforce development. So if your new application is around workforce development, then the overlap will not be there. I just wanted to reassure, because as I said, you know, our usual funding continues. You know, people apply to us and we do give grants on areas that we support already. So this specific one is around workforce development.
That's great. Thank you to all of the panel. That's been certainly really enlightening for me in terms of the nuances of what this is going to mean for applicants. I hope it's been really helpful to everyone who's been listening. You can get in touch with London Funders if you have more questions, and we'll try and forward those on to the right people, and we will update the guidance, the FAQs with all the answers that we've given today. Yeah, thanks to everyone. Nice to spend the morning with you. See you again soon.